Hi people, Daniel from Devil & Sons Guitars here, and thanks for tuning in to the 5th video in my series where I showcase the build for my entry to the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. This video is focusing on assembling all the parts from the previous videos. Well, let's get straight into it. As well as assembling all the parts I've already got, I'm adding some new bits on as well, things that will really bring it together. So here I am, cutting up some more of that acrylic mirror to put onto the top surface. Really what I want is some of the mirror to look a bit tarnished from the varnish, although some of it is polished, and some of it to look absolutely fresh, so it's got a look of being used. I'm using my 2-part glue to mix it together, an epoxy like Araldite, and then I'm basically positioning bits of mirror as and where, and a little bit of thin super glue to seal in the edges. Ideally, I cut out pieces that I planned beforehand where they were going to go, but often I then jig them around a bit as I was putting them on. It's really responding to what the guitar looks like as I go along. Like I've said in my previous video about building, my art background is as an artist, and I kind of like responding to things on the fly. Now I love this paint from Culture Hustle, the mirrorist mirror paint ever. It's on many bits of the guitar, but what I found is once the Spray Max, the clear coat on the top was put on, it lost some of its shine. So what I've done is I've then gone back over some of the areas to make them extra shiny by putting them on the top, very top. But also some of them I've left, like I mentioned before, looking a bit tarnished. It really adds to that relic look of this guitar. I had to put the nut back in. I'd taken that out whilst I was painting it to make sure it didn't get damaged in any way or clogged up with paint. And I'm just putting it back on using my fretting hammer. I had to remove some of the paint to make sure it fitted in perfectly. Obviously, as I'd sprayed the guitar, paint had accumulated into the nut slot. And the next few bits of videos are simply me assembling the guitar, starting with the bridge, screwing everything back together, putting those saddles in. Here you can see the relic look of the saddles. One of my most popular videos on my YouTube channel is about the full setup. So I'll leave a link below if you want to see the process I go through. In it, I talk about the equipment I use and the choices I make. But here I'm showing all the bits being screwed on and how I got them to fit. Here I've taken the pickup surrounds I've made. I'm making a pilot hole in them, which goes through them into the wood. And then leaning on a block of wood, I'm making those holes bigger to allow the screws to go through, but to go into the pilot holes on the body. It's exactly the same process for the back plate that's covering the cavity. Once I've done that, using my Dremel, just smoothing off any elements of the cavities that might be a bit lumpy from the paint to prepare for putting in the cavity insulation. For those of you that watched my video as part of the A to Z of Guitar series that I released in February of this year on cavity insulation, you'll know that I prefer using the cavity insulation paint. Although any type of insulation is really important, especially if you don't have insulated wires or humbuckers, because humbuckers offer a bit of resistance to that feedback you might get. On the back of the pickup surrounds though, I do use aluminium foil. Now, just before I've put this all together, I'm edging around where the pickup covers are going with that chrome paint again, so you don't see any of the insulation paint when the pickup covers are in place, but I'm making sure some of the insulation paint is still on that surface so it makes contact with the insulation tape that's on the back of the pickup covers. That way there's a full connection that's made. Now I've had to modify these lipstick pickups because I want them adjustable from above. So I'm widening the holes to allow me to put a nut and bolt on them. The idea here is the nut will be on the underside of the pickup with the bolt coming through from the top. I'm just basically gluing them in place at the moment with super glue, using my accelerator to make sure it hardens perfectly in place, and then I can unscrew the bolts. The bolts are there just to make sure it's all level. There's different ways to make humbuckers out of single coils, but for this I thought parallel would be best. And I've used some of the leftover cogs that I had from the last guitar I made for Dr. Gothic, the steampunk guitar. You can see more of that in the first video I made for this series where I talked about the design process. But anyway, I'm also gluing in place the nuts for the bolts, and then I'm using this, a 2-part epoxy metal, and I'm using that to surround the nuts, to link them really hard to the body and make sure that connection is going to be really stable no matter what. Once that's dried, I'm simply filing it down to shape to make sure the pickups still fit in. And here's a trick. On the end of the bolts, I'm using a marker pen. This is actually just a whiteboard marker, not a permanent marker. And then I'm pushing the pickups around over the pickups, and you can see the marks that it leaves on the edge of the surround. And that is exactly where I need to drill in order to make the holes that the bolts are going to go through. They're going to go through the pickup surrounds, through the holes in the pickup itself, into the nuts on the underside of the pickup, and then from screwing from above, it will allow me to adjust the pickup to go up and down closer towards the surround. But of course, it needs a spring there to add resistance to make sure it's held perfectly in the position that I want it to be. Here you can see how I've shaped that 2-part metal epoxy to hold the nut in place and to match the shape that the pickup already had. And now it's time for an 80s style montage of me screwing things. Perfect. Now, I don't know where your mind went there, but let's carry on with the build. So next is to put the neck in. Now, the choice I had here that was really a complicated one that I didn't know until I built the guitar is where I was going to put the strap buttons. And once I put the neck on, I decided I would use a trick that I've used many times before, which is to use one of the screws that's holding the neck in place as one of the strap buttons. And I've also used one of the pieces of wood which makes one of the crystals coming out of the back of the guitar as the other pin. Now, this piece of wood is pretty strong and held really tightly into the body, so I'm confident that that's going to be really strong. Of course, if Dr. Gothic ends up swinging this guitar around of his neck and jumping up and down like a madman, it probably isn't the ideal location, but I know that he doesn't use his guitar like that. Now, here's a really sped up piece of me just wiring up the guitar. I'm sure you don't need to see that in detail. It's wired up with just 2 volumes, one for each of the pickups. It's basically wired like a precision bass guitar. And the final thing to do is to give it a polish before photographing it. I've used a bit of Maguire's and a bit of Axe Wax. I've mentioned them before in my Instagram posts, so head over there to find out more. And then I'm going to end with a sneak peek of the finished guitar, but not showing it all to you, because if you want to see it all, you'll have to stay tuned for my final video in this series. I'll be putting it live very soon, and then the voting will start for the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. So do let me know in the comments below if there are any other entries that I should be checking out myself. I'm not in this to win it, I'm in it to build a community. I love the conversations we all have on YouTube. They've been fantastic throughout this build, supportive with other builders, sharing of ideas, and then with just general players and people watching YouTube feeding back on what they like about the different designs. Absolutely fantastic. So until next time, happy strumming.